If you're not following me on Twitter already, which I would highly recommend, link in the description, you won't know that I have a death wish and I'm currently taking part in my marathon that spans all of Doctor Who. Yes, that's right, every single TV story, along with all the audios, books and comics that I can get my grubby little Whovian hands on, shoved into their respective places in the timeline. And as of writing this, I have just finished what I've come to realise is the single worst season of Classic Who. What is it, I hear you asking? Could it possibly be the corny and over-exaggerated acid trip that's season 24? Or could it be the out-of-place and empty feeling season 11? Or even the jumbled inconsistency of season 14? It is in fact none of them. My personal least favourite series of Classic Who is the monotonous, unambitious, uninspired shambles of season 20. And here's why. The year is 1983, and Peter Davison has been in the role as the Doctor for over a year. His first season got off to a smooth start, with showrunner John Nathan Turner taking over the previous year. The series has now been moved to a bi-weekly time slot, and two of the main cast have departed from the TARDIS. Season 20 is significant due to it taking place during the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who. This was celebrated by bringing back such characters as the Brigadier, Omega, the Black Guardian, the Master, the Castellan, and the previous four Doctors. This season had a large weight on its shoulders, with lots of expectations to fulfill, so it's no surprise that it falls completely flat when trying to bring back so many loved and respected aspects from the show's past, as well as handling a companion departure and 3 companion entries, one of those 3 being a re-entry from Tegan as a previously established character. The 20th anniversary season was originally intended to be 28 episodes, however due to scheduling issues with Peter Davison and budgetary reasons, the season had to be cut short. This allowed for more money to be put into the following season, as well as letting the anniversary special take place within the time it needed. One of the original stories that was intended to be a part of this season would later become Resurrection of the Daleks. Season 19 ended abruptly with Time Flight, unanimously agreed to be one of the poorest received stories of the show's history. The episode ended with a very sudden companion departure that saw the Doctor abandoning Tegan Jovanka at Heathrow Airport. And with the tragic death of Adric in the previous serial Earthshock, this left the TARDIS feeling rather empty, compared to the bustling and busy nature of Season 19's lineup. This allows for more breathing room between the Doctor and Nyssa, who had previously struggled to form a relationship over the past series with the crowded feeling of too many companions. This also allows for Big Finish to fill in the space in between Time Flight and the Arc of Infinity by making some pretty solid stories featuring the 5th Doctor and Nyssa, which were honestly more enjoyable than some of the season itself. Arc of Infinity brings back Gallifrey, the Doctor's home planet. This hadn't been seen since the finale of Season 15, The Invasion of Time. It was always going to be ambitious returning to Gallifrey, especially considering the tight budget that failed to bring it back to life. Classic Who had also developed a problem of more being less when it came to the Time Lords. When we first see them in the final episode of the War Games, they are a powerful and mighty race of gods. However, in later episodes, they slowly devolve into bumbling old politicians who argue amongst themselves and have no sense of power. This is unfortunately the case with the Arc of Infinity. They spend the majority of the episode talking in the room and hardly doing anything. The episode is extremely boring due to this. What exacerbates this is the return of one of the Doctor's oldest enemies, Omega, who had previously encountered the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Doctors in the 10th anniversary story, The Three Doctors. To me, Omega was never really a worthy adversary to bring back. It may be too obvious or repetitive, but maybe having another Master story on Gallifrey would have made more sense. Either way, the story revolves around Omega attempting to cross over from the antimatter universe through the Doctor. It's an okay idea, but it's just handled extremely lousily. It's one of those stories where it's just too simple. Not much happens as a result, and it could have done with more plot threads. However, we are given such threads in the return of Tegan as the companion, who previously departed in the story before. So this plot point is entirely useless, and the further characters that assist Tegan don't do anything at all. As a result, Arc of Infinity is extremely boring. It really says something when the most memorable part of the story is the betrayal of one of the guards. Yes, Colin Baker actually played the role of Commander Maxiel in this episode, and his performance is extremely exaggerated and overplayed, almost casting a shadow over the story itself. Ultimately, the Arc of Infinity falls incredibly flat. It doesn't work as a season opener, nor does it have a competent script to keep up with its ideas. Gallifrey looks cheap, and it spends half of its time bringing back a character who'd left in the previous story for absolutely no reason. The location stuff looks good though. The series continues with Snake Dance, once again bringing back a successful villain from the past. This episode sees the return of the Mara, the snake-like creature previously seen in Kinder from the season before. The common consensus is that Kinder is a lot better than Snake Dance, but this, of course, is Cynical Who, the so-called home of unpopular opinions, so naturally I prefer Snake Dance to Kinder. There's a lot to be admired within it. Snake Dance displays the world long after the events of Kinder, and it remains to be a large part of the planet's cultural history, yet it's commercialised. The story is naturally full of snakes, but they're not feared at all. They're trivialised in commercial pieces of memorabilia. Snake Dance shows just how human the people of Menusa have become to their history. It's a reflection of the mundane. Snake Dance is one of the most human episodes of Doctor Who, showing how desensitised these people become to their own history, whilst also containing deep themes of religion and commitment. The story itself isn't the best. I seem to appreciate Snake Dance more for its themes. I've never really been a big fan of the Mara stories, however they do allow for some of Janet Fielding's best performances in the show. That being said, I'm really not a fan of how she played the character in this series. One of the things that lets down Season 20 is the companions. Tegan just doesn't click with me as much as he did in Season 19. Nyssa has actually improved significantly, especially in Snake Dance, but unfortunately is shoved aside and treated poorly by the out-of-character Fifth Doctor, who seems to be in a constant bad mood for no reason. Nyssa has some good moments in this episode, but just has no room to breathe at all. Jonathan Morris plays the character of Sheila, who is really, really good. Personally, I think he would have been better as the next companion, and this season could have progressed with just the Doctor, Nyssa and Sheila, rather than ending up with Tegan, Turlough and Chameleon. His performance is so well done throughout, despite the actor not really taking much of an interest in the show. The story also looks very visually striking. The design once again brings it back to life. This is still on a tight budget, but the creativity of the production team managed to make it work. Overall, I think Snake Dance is better than Kinder, but only slightly. Within the context of the season, it's definitely one of the better episodes. Mordred Undead continues the theme of bringing back recurring characters. This story, although initially intended to bring back Ian Chesterton, sees the return of the Brigadier. It's incredibly difficult for me to view this story beyond my rose-tinted glasses, as it was one of the first Doctor Who stories that I ever saw. Much like Delta and the Bannerman, I watched this story so much as a child that it remains burnt into my brain and makes me extremely nostalgic to revisit it. The story sees the life of a schoolboy who is under control of the Black Guardian, another returning character who was previously seen in the Armageddon Factor. The Black Guardian is again an odd character to bring back, but it works for the most part in this story. The idea was to have a trilogy of stories take place in the middle of the series, much like the E-Space trilogy in Season 18. I don't think mid-series trilogies like this really work. It would have worked better if the Black Guardian was introduced in the first episode of the series and the arc was wrapped up in the season finale. Mordred Undead is full of some highbrow sci-fi concepts, and it's enjoyable for the most part. It has its laughably bad moments, but it has its fair share of hard-hitting scenes. It doesn't seem to work terribly well as a Brigadier story. I suppose it's mainly because the audience are accustomed to seeing him in a unit setting, confronting an alien invasion. It's not the worst return for the character, although it's certainly not the best. Nicholas Courtney plays the role excellently, however. In fact, he plays the roles of the earlier, lively Brigadier and the older, more stubborn version. It's also the introduction of Turlough, who is by far the worst classic companion. I've never really been sure what to think of Turlough. His character constantly changes throughout the series, and Mark Strickson's performance is somewhat lacking. He's good in this introduction story, however, he adds to the TARDIS team, once again making the crew seem cramped without room for development. Mordred Undead just manages to give Nyssa something to do. It's a shame because, as I said earlier, Nyssa was really finding her feet in this series, so it's a shame she was overshadowed by the other characters like Turlough. Tegan actually has something to do in this story as well. It may not be too much, but at least it's something. Again, it's difficult for me to critically analyse this one due to my nostalgic bias towards it. If I hadn't grown up with it, I would have seen it as a pretty average Doctor Who story that has its fair share of flaws and good moments. Halfway through the Black Guardian trilogy comes this story, and it was destined to fail. With the lack of ability to sustain a TARDIS team of 4 in this season, Terminus had no hope. Attempting to further develop the relationship between Tegan and Turlough as well as writing out Nyssa, Terminus has a lot to juggle for one story. The Doctor in this story once again completely loses character, playing the role as he did in Snake Dance as a condescending type. This story does nothing for the Black Guardian trilogy. The Black Guardian himself is barely in it, and it hardly expands on Turlough. This could have taken place completely outside of the arc, and nothing would have changed. The story itself is incredibly dull. The plot is empty and nonsensical, it looks awful, and the performances are some of the worst in the show. The main cast didn't like the script, so they didn't put in the effort. It's a shame for Nyssa's final story that she was given this. This is, in my opinion, the worst classic Doctor Who story. Everything about this story sucks, apart from the slightly promising first few minutes. I barely have anything to say about Terminus, which is odd considering how strongly I feel about it. But that's the problem with this season. It's not that I hate it, it's that I have no feeling towards it whatsoever. Whether it's the dull, monotonous tone of the stories or my ever-decreasing mental health numbing me to the pain and stopping me from enjoying all things nice in a desperate attempt to bring myself back to a stable position where I'm not clinging on for my very existence. Enlightenment is the final instalment in the Black Guardian trilogy, and no surprise that I find this one slightly underwhelming. It's not awful, much like Mordred Undead, I'm extremely nostalgic towards it, but there's something about this story that just doesn't hit home for me. It has a lot of atmosphere and some really creepy moments, but I just feel shortchanged by it. And I don't know what I was expecting as a finale to this already flimsy idea for a trilogy. It has a really nice premise, and the Eternals are a great concept. Enlightenment reminded me very much of the War Games or the Armageddon Factor, or even Carnival of Monsters, with these powerful beings bringing together a small species for their own entertainment. It also feels like it drags on a bit too much and has too many plot threads for one story. The focus was more on the race than the confrontation between the Black and White Guardians, both of which who come into the story too late. For this reason, the ending is a little bit underwhelming. There is not a large sense of achievement within the arc. Neither Turlo nor the Doctor gain anything from this experience, rendering the entire arc useless. The confrontation between the two Guardians is also disappointing. It hardly took much for the Black Guardian to be defeated in the Armageddon Factor, and it's unfortunately the same here. The story itself is enjoyable for the most part, if a little long. There's something stopping me from enjoying it fully, and I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe a rewatch or even experiencing a special edition on the DVD might change that. It's definitely one of the better stories of the season, but it seems odd to have it placed halfway through the series as opposed to it being the finale. Once a year during the Fifth Doctor's run there would be a two-parter, a story that's half the length of a regular episode. In Season 19, it was Black Orchid, in Season 21, it was The Awakening, and in Season 20, it was The King's Demons. A lot of people bash the two-parters, and I can't really understand why. Even if the story is bad, at least it doesn't outstay its welcome. Either way, The King's Demons is somehow simultaneously a breath of fresh air from the season, whilst also being the very embodiment of all that's wrong about Season 20. A break from the season due to its relaxed and easygoing nature with a simple plot and familiar villain. However, it sums up the season due to me feeling absolutely nothing towards it. Don't get me wrong, I like King's Demons, but I felt very shortchanged by it. The whole season had been leading up to this point, and for what? There is no climax or resolution to the season. Enlightenment would have been a much better end than this episode. Instead, we are given yet another companion to introduce to the TARDIS team who is completely ignored until the exit story, and a bog-standard historical adventure, thrown in with hardly any plot. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the historicals in Doctor Who. In fact, I think they're extremely overlooked, and some of the best stories are historicals. It's one of the aspects I rather enjoy about this story. It looks quite nice, and the characters are well done. It's nice to see Anthony Ainley back giving his usual spectacular performance as the Master, despite his ridiculous disguise that I'm not sure how anyone didn't see through. I like the Fifth Doctor and the Master episodes. It harks back to the Pertwee era when the two would meet regularly. They have a great dynamic that leaves you wanting more each time. And apart from that, I don't really have anything else to say about the King's Demons, and I think that pretty much sums up the entire season. It's not a season that I hate, like Series 7 or Series 10, where I can pick apart the bad bits and rant about them for hours. I just have nothing to say about it. Season 20 is such an uneventful and empty season. I struggle to talk about its problems because there's not much to say other than it's bad. It just about holds up as a season itself, but it's only when you compare it to others that you realise how bad it really is. The best seasons of Doctor Who all have an overarching theme within them with some sort of payoff. Season 18 has its entropy and decay resulting in the regeneration of the Doctor. Season 26 has the 7th Doctor testing Ace's strengths. Series 1 is a redemption arc for the 9th Doctor and the people around him. And Season 20 has nothing at all. Hardly anything changes between the Arc of Infinity and the King's Demons, apart from there are just two new awful companions who add nothing to the show and have no character whatsoever, and are just plot devices for the Planet of Fire. All in all, Season 20 is wasted potential. A season full of promising ideas but with a terrible execution, a lack of consistent themes, and a weak finale. All these elements combine to make a season which I don't see myself revisiting anytime soon. I think it's pretty safe to say that Season 20 is the worst series of classic Doctor Who.